Hey everybody, welcome back. If you are new here, my name is Kathryn Hubert. I am the chef and owner and disability integration coach at Chez Genèse, which is a French-inspired cafe in downtown Greensboro, North Carolina. And we are on a mission to change the way that our world both views and employs people with disabilities. We have an integrated work team, which means that 50% of our team are disabled and 50% are non-disabled. We have been open for just over 6 years. And today we are talking about how to support neurodiversity in the workplace. This is something that is really important to us because of our team and how our team is constructed. And it's also really important to us because part of the way that we hope to change the way that our world views and employs people with disabilities is by working with other businesses, other organizations who have a mindset or a desire to make their workplaces more inclusive, more integrated, more accepting and embracing of all brains and of all people. And so we're here today to talk about that. We're going to do that by breaking this up into two different parts. So the first part is going to be remembering two different things, and then the second part is going to be embracing two different things. Here we go. Okay, it's a social concept and construct that's been around for about 30 years. It developed in the late 1990s by a sociologist called Judy Singer. If you're interested in learning more specifically about what neurodiversity is and the difference between neurodiversity and disability, you can check out this video over here. All that being said, you have neurodiversity on your team always because every brain is different. A lot of times the way that neurodiversity is talked about and used currently is it still ties back to the idea that there is some sort of norm or baseline for a brain, and then people who fall outside of that norm or baseline oftentimes identify as being neurodiverse. I think there's room for that concept and definition to still grow and change as our understanding of our brains continues to grow and to change, but just know that that's typically the way that it's used currently. That doesn't mean that that's necessarily always best, but that is what you will hear most of the time. And so we're going to still use that as a jumping off point today because that's the way that that's used in our culture. That being said, what are some things to remember, to keep in mind, to lock into your mindset when considering neurodiversity among your team? The first is there's no standard or optimal brain. That sometimes when we think of neurodiversity, I think in culture, a lot of times if we're thinking back to there's a baseline or there's a norm for the human brain, that can sometimes get confused or become a synonym for that being the right kind of brain or an ideal brain. That's not true. It may be that something is more common or that it is something that we're more familiar with. That doesn't mean that it's right, that it's better, that it's the ideal. And so when you start to consider what neurodiversity looks like among your team, keeping that in mind is really important. We're not trying to convince people to have a specific type of brain or to think in a certain way, to understand the world in a certain way. What we're wanting to do is actually break that and to understand that people are going to think, they're going to understand, they're going to perceive in very different ways, and that actually is normal. That is to be expected. It's just not the way that we've always operated, right? We typically follow a specific pattern for education, for what our work life looks like, for what functional living looks like. And so this idea of embracing and supporting neurodiversity is actually going to push against that there isn't necessarily an ideal, there maybe even necessarily isn't a norm, but we're making space for things to look different and to do that in a neutral way and not assigning positivity or negativity to that, but instead being more observers, being more curious, and being more neutral. The second thing that we want to remember is get to know your people. One of the questions that I get asked the most in my line of work is, how do you hire people with disabilities, or how do you train people with disabilities? And my answer to that goes back to, well, I hire or I train people with disabilities the way that I would people. And that is my baseline. And my baseline is I want to get to know my people. I want to understand my team. I want to get to know them as individuals, what excites them, what are their goals, what things are stressful to them, what kind of work environment do they like to be in, what kind of work environment do they thrive in, what are ways that we can support each other, etc. And so we could kind of do a history lesson here, real brief. right? At some point in the United States, and I think that the Industrial Revolution probably had a lot to do with this, but we've streamlined, we've tried to make our workplaces more efficient. At some point, we really started replacing people with machinery. And as a result, we were looking for things to be the same. You want to mass produce something, you need it to all be the same. And when humans are involved, there's going to be little nuances and differences always, because every person is different and every person is going to do things differently. I think that there's a lot of charm and there's a lot of beauty in that. And we have lost this appreciation overall as a society for what humans and people can actually bring into work and into life, what they can contribute. And so it's really important not only to get to know your people, but to then also understand that there are going to be those nuances, there are going to be those differences, and that actually adds a lot of value. It can be something that really speaks to the intention and to the person who is behind whatever is being created. But keeping that in mind, not getting so focused on everything needs to be exactly the same. Every person needs to be exactly the same, right? We're not robots. We are people. We are going to be different. And then taking the time to get to know those differences is really important. And knowing that just like every brain is different, like that's the whole concept of neurodiversity, right? And a lot of times we think like, well, here's the normal brain, here's the neurodiverse brain, and everyone who has this brain is the same, and everyone who has this brain is the same. And that's not true. They're all still different, even in those categories. And so you can have 10 different people on your team who all identify as neurodiverse, and they're not going to all think or feel the same way about something, and keeping that in mind too. And again, getting to know the individual. And then 2 things that you can embrace. Number 1 is a sense of humor. This is one of the things that I find to be so delightful about my team. And I say that in a laughing with each other, not a laughing at each other. That is an important distinction. But part of what our brains find to be funny is that something surprises us, right? If you're setting up a joke, your brain is thinking one way, and then that punchline, if it's a good punchline, is taking you in a different direction. And that surprise, that sense of not seeing what was coming, that's what we find funny. And so in a team where there's a lot of neurodiversity and there's a lot of brains that are thinking in different directions, it opens up this opportunity for us to find a lot of humor among our team, because our brains are constantly being surprised. And that goes all different directions among our team. But we're constantly laughing with each other because we're thinking in so many different directions and in so many different ways that there are constant opportunities to be surprised and delighted throughout the day. And that really, if you lean into that, can add so much vibrancy to your work environment. And then the second thing to embrace is candor. With everything that I'm saying in this video, there are some generalizations that are being made because I can't get into the nuance of every single person. And even if I did, that wouldn't be beneficial to you, because every single person that you work with is going to be different than every single person that I work with. So these are some generalizations that is on purpose. But I also just want to say that I recognize that, and that there are going to be more nuance when you apply this to your own team. But candor. In general, I have found that working with people with disabilities and working with people who are neurodiverse, direct communication is the way to go. It is usually preferred. It's usually what happens. And we are here in the South, which is not known for its direct communication. Southerners are quite indirect and oftentimes quite passive aggressive, but they make it sound, so pleasant and buttoned up that it really is it's a mindset shift, and it's a communication style change to be in an environment where we communicate directly with one another. It's helpful because you eliminate reading between the lines and having to rely on a lot of extra social cues and a lot of context that's not being verbalized in order to make sense of what someone is saying. Like, the direct communication is really helpful. Just in general, I have found that to be so helpful for myself personally as I've gotten more and more used to that, but then my team as well. Like, that just benefits all of us. It's something that I've really, really grown to appreciate. The feedback is real and legitimate. The compliments are real and legitimate. Like, you know where you stand with someone, and there's the opportunity to also communicate authentically about what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling, and then to trust that the other person is going to do the same with me. And as a whole, so I'd recommend this regardless of whether there's how much neurodiversity there is on your team. That direct communication builds a lot of trust and ultimately has made us so much stronger as a team environment as well. So those are my things. Remembering there's no standard, there's no ideal brain, and get to know your people, and then embrace humor. Losing track of my fingers. Embrace humor and embrace candor and direct communication. So questions, thoughts, drop them below. We're so glad you're here today. And if you're new, again, hope that you will take some time to get to know us and to check out some of our other videos, to subscribe, to join our community. We are so thankful to have you here. Chez Genèse teammate, your key word this week is punchline.